All right, so we have four scenarios we've identified from this experience and exposure. So I'm going to copy those scenarios. This would be what I think you should put a lot of emphasis and focus on, in my opinion. But let's talk about each one of them. Participate in less complex development and design of methodology standards for review. All I'll tell you here is that go to our risk assessment scenario here and understand all those guidelines for doing a risk assessment. I think you will not be doing the risk assessment, but if they want to know your experience around risk assessment, feel free to share it. Now, don't forget the essence of the risk assessment is to analyze and assess what is the actual risk to our organization, right? So you're doing an assessment to really understand the risk to your business. So for example, if I am selecting certain application to test, it's based on certain risk assessment that got me to the point of selecting those applications to test. Let me give you a practical one. If somebody exploits your financial application, it's fair to say that is a pretty significant thing because this is financial. If somebody exploits your system that hosts personal identification information, such as security, our name, our date of birth, our IDs, and all our banking details, those are huge violation. So it means that application is significant. So if I'm testing, I'm not going to test every application in the world. Mostly I focus on testing applications that are relevant to major processes, PHI, personal health information, personal identification information, or things that we feel are significant enough to make us violate certain regulation or loss of revenue or loss of credibility as an organization. So those are big significant things to kind of think about, okay? So that's what the first one is saying. Let's go to the second one. Ensure effective and appropriate testing, validation, documentation is done. To be honest, all this big grammar is just about testing of controls. And that is where I'm going to go to this part. Let me just explain this scenario real quick. The scenario, I believe, 6, I believe. Let's talk about, this last one I talked about, this one. So typically somebody asks you what's a typical day as an IT auditor. So you have to tell me it depends on the day. Typically, if it's in the planning phase, if I'm doing walkthrough, if I'm doing testing or writing report, those will be like my typical phases. If it's planning, I'm deciding what applications, database, operating system, cloud platform would be in scope. If I'm doing a walkthrough, it means at that point, I'm conducting meetings, interviews with the right stakeholders, taking screenshots and taking notes. If I'm doing testing, depending on the test, if it's test of design, test of operating effectiveness, if it is design, I'm doing a test of one. If it is test of operating effectively, I'm using our testing sampling methodology to extract the appropriate samples to test. And what are the controls we've tested? You tell me, well, key controls I've tested include logical access control, change management control, IT operation control. For logical access controls, I've tested new user testing to ensure that only appropriate users are granted access to the system. For terminated users, I want to make sure all terminated access has been removed from our system. If it's a transfer user, I want to make sure the access granted to those users is not potentially causing conflict of interest. And also system security setting to ensure that the best practices are used for the system setting in accordance to our policy. For change management, whatever change is applicable to application, database, infrastructure, or any critical device, we want to make sure the changes are properly documented, it's authorized, approved, tested, monitored, and validated. And also if there's potential segregation of duty issue within the change management. And that means if the requester of the change is also the approval of the change, then that would cause a segregation of duty issue. And finally, I've done IT operation control testing. Within the IT operation control testing, I do tests like job schedule, batch processing to ensure only authorized users can process any job. And also I've done backup and recovery testing to make sure that there's appropriate backup and recovery at any point in time. And the same thing for problem and incident management to make sure that at any point in time, the incident and problem are appropriately resolved in a timely manner. Those are the key controls, or we call them primary controls in general. So I would expect you to be able to, articulate and talk about it, because this is a testing role. Okay. All right. We have 2 more minutes. Let's quickly jump on the other part of it. I'll make some updates to this document and I'll send it to the larger team later. All right. Let's see the other one. This talks about, number 2 is talk about. Number 3, support and implement less complex, low to moderate risk and exercise independent to escalation and resolution. So what this is saying is simple. And this is going to be for your scenario 4. So this is saying, if there are issues identified, how do you escalate, or how do you remediate it or follow up with the issues? That's what it's talking about. All right. So it's a process to make sure, okay, we are following up with the issue, we are escalating as needed. If it's a significant enough issue, then of course we have to escalate it, right? As simple as that. Because sometimes your role will include, all right, you're going back to reperform a test you did before. Some people call it year-end testing, whatever they call it. The bottom line is you're going back to reperform the testing, right? So in that situation or instance, then you have to follow up to make sure the issues have been fixed in that case. The second to the last, present recommendation for resolving complex issues, judgment while developing, blah, blah. So typically, after every test you've done, sometimes you would expect them to have what we call management response. So let's say you have finding, you say, well, I found a few terminated users still active in the system. So you tell them management response, meaning they will say, I agree with this finding, or I don't agree. If they don't agree, typically they will put a reason. For example, they could tell you, well, even though the users are active in the system and they are terminated, we've removed the access from their network. However, the access on the application or database, as per our policy, requires us to get it out within 2 weeks. So they might say we are within the 2 weeks. We've removed the access immediately from the network. So technically they cannot have access to the application or database because they are out of the network. So they might have an explanation, and that's fine. I mean, I would rather have you being conservative to ding people than you being nice, because that would not look good on you. So think from that point of view. And finally, somebody said, it says collaborate and consult with colleagues. This is just collaboration skill to be able to work with people, right? Let's see some things here. Team environment, blah, blah, blah. These are just regular behavioral things. Then one thing they can ask you, they could ask you, so how do you communicate findings to a customer or a client that refuse or that does not agree with your finding? And that happens a lot. So I'll just say, you know what, respectfully, you're right. Sometimes it happens. But what I've found out is that most times, anytime I highlight the risk to my stakeholders, they tend to agree with me. Because what I've done is that I'm saying, okay, you know what, I'm not here to say, it's not a got you game. I'm just here to say, based on the risk, always go back to risk. You can never go wrong, because at the end of the day, you can always tell them, you know what, the focus is on the risk. At the end of the day, it's all about the risk, and that's it. All right, let me pause. Any question? But I think that's really the core, in my opinion. Question?
Not really. There were 2 positions. There was also a senior role, which I also applied for after I got this interview. So I'm thinking of, maybe telling them that I'm also open to the senior role.
Apply to everything applicable. Okay. All right. Now, the only thing I'll tell you is, every one of us, I'm sure on this call, to think about it this way. The truth is that the expectation of the job will not change. They expect the same level of quality and standard from us. But every time you put yourself as a senior, the expectation changes a little bit. Now, the nice thing, because I know this company, it's a bigger company, it might not be so obvious because you can hide under the bracket of bigger, whatever. But I'll be honest with everybody. Look, if you start a new gig or a new role, you have to burn the candle the early parts. You have to do extra research, extra work. My goal is always to get you the job, right? Push hard to get a job. Now, survival is a different thing. Survival is your skill, your networking, your knowing where to pull resource. do research, follow up online, do whatever it takes to keep your job, right? So for now, before we even think of keeping a job, we need a job, right? So that part of it is a different conversation entirely. But for now, let's even get a job. So I'm just saying senior versus junior. If you ask my opinion, I would say let's sneak in as a junior for now and just go in as a regular IT auditor. But apply to both, because anyone that comes through, then at least we have two options.
Yeah.
Let's do that monster then, but in your mind, if they give you option of taking senior or regular role, I may likely tilt to just take the regular role for my first gig.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's just my thought,
No,
because I don't want to put you on the spotlight
yeah.
and expect magic, So, all right, cool. I gotta go. Thank you everybody for hanging out with us, and Godspeed. I'll post this to the regular group. Take care, everybody. Bye.